welcome to another episode of Automation Ladies. This one is pre-recorded in my office here in Houston with Ali on site. Hey, Ali.
Hi.
So we've been hanging out for the last few days here. We've done a couple of recordings this week. And so we're not entirely sure when this is going to air, possibly sometime after our stint at the assembly show next week and Automate. But we have, busy conference season coming up. So we wanted to try to get a few episodes recorded here with people that we've been waiting to talk to for a long time. One of them being our guest today, Vinny Endres, who we most recently saw in person in Dallas at TraceRouteCon, the infamous training class for industrial networking run by our friend Josh Varghese at TraceRoute. And that is part of what inspired our upcoming conference. That part of why Ali is in Houston is that we were just touring the Phoenix Contact Customer Experience
Technology
Center.
Center.
Yeah, Customer Technology Center. I'll get the terminology correct to make sure that we, to finalize hosting our event there. So our event is called OT SCADACon. You probably have heard about it by now. If you haven't, go check it out. automationladies.io/OT SCADACon. And Vinny is going to be one of our speakers there as well. So we are super excited to get you to, get to know him a little bit and hear his backstory. And one of the things that we bonded over eating barbecue in Dallas was the fact that he works with a lot of dairies and dairy farms and has a background in that. And Ali and I actually, more of a family history than direct experience, but my grandfather worked at a dairy plant his whole career. Making butter. Ali's grandfather also made butter. So we have a dairy lineage, so to speak. And so we got super excited to talk about dairy and all kinds of farm automation with Vinny. So Vinny, thank you so much for coming on to our show.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.
You're welcome. You're not one of the few people. It's getting more common these days when we say, hey, come on the show. And you were like, yeah, sure. Okay. It made it easy. Can you tell us, for our audience, just give us a little, I guess our first question is generally, can you tell us the backstory of how the heck you got into automation?
Yeah, so I grew up on a dairy farm, as you mentioned, and actually kind of had a little stint where I wanted to be an engineer in middle school, that took all the advanced math, and then hit high school and lost that motivation and decided to be a diesel mechanic, and ended up going to school for crop and soil science, actually. So big twist of events there. And then came back to the farm to work as a diesel mechanic. Did not use crop and soil science at all. And as a mechanic, I actually disliked electronics entirely. I would avoid them, and if it needed it, I would just send it in. But eventually, I read this book. I wish I could remember the name. I think it was ESI something, but it was a guy who wrote this book on graph paper explaining electricity. It was the first one that was dumbed down enough I actually understood it. And then I learned how a relay works and thought I was smart. So fast forward a few more years, we're putting in a new parlor at the farm, and an electrician walks by this alarm interface box, and it's full of relays. And he goes, why didn't they just put a PLC in here? What's a PLC? So I look it up, and this thing looks pretty neat. Tried my hand at some other programming in the past. Always liked dinking with computer games, but never really stuck it out. And so this is a nice low barrier to entry. I could get along with this. It's visual. And got a PLC, taught myself how to do it, replaced a few things around the farm. Had a close friend in the ag community from the East Coast contact me about making his ice machine for his vegetables run from his phone, and thought, wow, people will pay you to do this. So got really interested in that, and decided that I wanted to explore that a little more and see where things went. So decided electrical engineering is probably a good path to go back to school for. And it's a terrible choice when you're older. It's very hard to do, but especially electrical engineering. But did it anyways, and it was very interesting. Did a nice flexible transfer program they had, and had worked for an integrator for a little bit, had to leave that to finish the schooling, and had big plans to work for a few more years with other people, hopefully with this goal of coming back and doing my own thing at some point. The problem kind of came up that just had so many people asking for things in the ag community primarily that you kind of had to make a choice. And so while I left without the best knowledge of, what you would consider an experienced person in the integration world, I did understand the process we were trying to automate. So kind of went there, and it's most of this world is what's your Rolodex, for an outdated term, I guess, networking. And just like
I just said that on our last podcast. I used that term too.
the
And I was like, well,
Rolodex.
I don't mean the actual physical Rolodex. I mean your network.
She has one.
And I do have an actual physical one.
Yeah, it's and I have a stack of business cards, but yeah, they it really is. And my parents, my whole family has kind of been big on networking from when we were younger. My parents kind of instilled that in us, drug us to all the different organizations through dairy farming. We had Jersey cows, so we were really active in that and saw the power of having a nationwide network of people to with similar ideas in similar industries. And so I kind of developed my own in the ag world through the years, talking smart on the internet, things like that. And really that all kind of came back, that you had all these people, knew who you were, saw what you were doing, and just started asking if you could do stuff. So that it really grew from there, and started Bitmasked 3 years ago. And it's really kind of just taken off primarily through the word of mouth, in the fresh produce and dairy, and then grain as well.
Okay. So that's Bitmasked Automation,
Yeah,
right? Is
yeah,
the name of the company?
correct. So I didn't like Endres Automation because spelling my last name is very hard. You have to do it phonetically over the phone. So I wanted to be cute and use something from computers that none of your customers would understand. So I used Bitmasked, and then the first time I spelt it over the phone, realized my mistake.
Allie and I were actually just talking about it earlier. She was encouraged not to put her own name on her company, even though so a friend of ours that David Turner,
Yep.
he just changed his company name to Turner Process.
Turner Process Automation.
That I remember.
Yeah.
Turner Process Automation, maybe.
I think so.
I think process systems.
That may be correct.
It's something, but it has the word Turner in it, and now I'll remember that because his old company name, which was much more descriptive, it was just hard for me to keep track of it. It was Process and Automation Specialist, I think.
Yes.
But I was like, I know it's Process and Specialist, but yeah, there's pros and cons to, I guess, those. I grew up with the last name Hallgrímsdóttir. And so putting my name on anything would probably be just like instant suicide.
Yeah.
So I feel your pain there. I love the company name, by the way.
Why did you what does it mean to you outside of like it was cute? Like, do you have like some kind of, I don't know what it means to you?
No.
Story behind it?
No, there's nothing cool. I need to come up with a fake one someday though, for if I ever have to give a fancy presentation. But
I bet you ChatGPT could come up with some crap.
Yeah, probably. It really was. I was sitting in school still at the time when I started it, and just looking at all the things around us. And I was like, well, I don't know. I mean, it's something a little generic. It came up, one was like 2n solutions, because binary is 2 to the n. Maybe that would have been a better idea. But then, the Bitmask came up, and then there's a little debate about proper English and if it should be Bitmask or Bitmasked, which just plain Bitmask would have been way easier to spell, but it is what it is.
Well, now we've discussed it enough that really anybody that wants to remember it probably can.
Yeah, don't forget the ED.
And I'm assuming your website would be what, bitmaskedautomation.com?
It's actually just bitmask.com. Keep it even simpler.
Oh, okay.
Nobody had that, but yeah.
Yeah, that also nowadays can play a big factor in what company name you choose.
Yes.
You got to go see if the domain is available, and then you're like, oh, am I going to go for .net or .io, or do I have to change the name or buy out whoever owns .com? Somebody actually reached out to us recently offering to sell us the domain automationladies.com.
Nice.
For like several hundred or maybe several $1,000s. I don't remember, but
we're good.
We were like, nah, we're fine. So and then also, like, I guess your company name does not constrain you to farm or produce or any of the particular applications that you work on.
No, it doesn't. And that was part of the goal at first. I had no idea where any of this was going to go. I actually it didn't even get registered as Bitmasked Automation. I added that in later so people would know that that's what we were doing. Because at the time, I was doing a bunch of 3D printers, doing a whole bunch of things. And it wasn't really until the last year, especially, where really just honed in on the ag stuff, read some books, went through some leadership things, and a lot of them these days talk about find what you're kind of good at and just stick to that. Every time you branch out, you're spending a lot of time and resources trying to learn something new, which is fine to an extent, but there's always that has a cost to it. So if you can find an area that you're good at, stick to it. And there's plenty of people in the industrial space that are doing a great job. If someone asked me to do something, I would consider it, but we're not actively looking to get into those markets if they're not closely related to ag.
This podcast is brought to you with support from Inductive Automation, celebrating more than 20 years of digital transformation for industrial automation. Ignition by Inductive Automation comes packed with innovative features for the modern control system, like unlimited licensing, high-powered tags, mobile-first flexibility, and an intuitive built-in design environment. The Ignition platform provides the tools your enterprise needs to build HMI, SCADA, IIoT, MES, and digital transformation solutions on the plant floor, at the edge, and in the cloud. Ignition supports operations of any size or industry, and it's used by 61% of the Fortune 100. See all that Ignition has to offer and download it for free at inductiveautomation.com.
Yeah. Well, it's a great position to be in, to have the network and to be well known for what you can do, and for people to have that trust that they want to call somebody that they know or that they know of, that, versus trying to maybe find somebody that has the top of the line, best experience, most fancy everything, but, they're unknown to you.
Right.
Right. And I think people they discount how much that emotional factor plays into business decisions. Sometimes just knowing that you can call somebody and that they're not going to BS you over the phone or whatever, like that's a huge value in business versus just, you may or may not like be the most experienced company that's been around for the longest doing this. At least for me, and I see that with my dad too. Most of his projects have come from people that know him. My job came from somebody that knows me. If I had sent out my resume to QuoteBeam to become employee number 1 and they didn't know me, they'd be like, I don't think it would have even made it to anybody's desk.
Right.
One thing that you said, though, about your parents, and that's really cool. And I'm going to take this lesson and try to teach my kids that, networking early, when you just to get to know and make sure that you are plugged into those communities. Later on, when you have something to offer, those people know you.
Right.
And I don't think that you can ever start too early with those sorts of things. If there's a way, right? I'm not going to start shoving my kids to trade shows and make them hand out business cards. But
Yeah, I mean, and a lot of mine was, the stuff with my parents was a little, going to conventions and all that and the events, more in-person networking. Most of my acquaintances to this day, I still haven't met half of them in person. And even this first customer of mine, he had never met me. I didn't even know his real name, because this goes back to forums where you didn't use your real name back in the day. And most of that networking with all those people really was, I like to learn, which, most of us engineers types like to. And so people would post a question and I would not know the answer, but I'd be like, well, we could figure out what a likely answer would be to it and actually do a lot of research and try to figure out that answer, because now you have that knowledge. Because if someone doesn't ask the question, and if you get 1,000 people on the internet asking questions, that's a lot more pool of knowledge to draw from. And so things that interested me and answer them. And I guess that just kind of created a lot of connections with a lot of people, that eventually evolved, through emails or Facebook or whatever it was, started to learn the real faces behind some of them and connect with a nice small group of them.
So what forums specifically have you been frequenting or use?
Well, so back in the day, a lot of the ag ones came from one called New Ag Talk, actually, was one of the original ag forums from the 90s. It wasn't called that initially, but I got on it kind of late. My forums experiences started when I was younger as a mechanic working on the farm. I worked on people's Duramax diesel pickups on the side. And so I was in all of those different forums. That was kind of my first exposure. And so when these companies keep updating their forums the past 5-10 years, and they move away from the vBulletin format. I'm still kind of stuck in my ways, but that was where
I think
the experience.
own experience.
What's
Like
that?
it doesn't need to be, forums are their own experience, and I don't, in my opinion, they don't need to be messed with. Like, just if it's an active forum and people are on there and they are still exchanging ideas and whatever, like, leave it alone. I don't I don't know. Maybe that's just me.
Yeah, I think the last one I remember being, because naturally we all look at plcs.net. And that was the last one in kind of the true vBulletin format. And I know it changed. I don't know if it's still a part of vBulletin, but I know it just updated the last couple months. So that was the last shred of youth, I guess, gone. But these days, I don't spend much time on a lot of the ag related ones as much. I stay more in using the same philosophy kind of on some of the forums that are specific for the hardware I use, or there are the three generic places we all go to for PLC stuff: plcs.net, Reddit, and LinkedIn, and just try to stay up on everything as much as I can.
Yeah, so it's a great tip to any of our listeners if you are interested in branching out into areas that you don't have much of a network or you need more knowledge. Those are some great forums to hit up. I don't know about Mr. PLC. Did you ever frequent that forum?
I myself didn't know that one, and there was like a control forum.net or something too. I've come across a lot of them, but I'm a late bloomer really in the PLC world. I've only been in it for, well, realistically, like 5 years. So
Yeah. Okay. Well, now you have some tips as to where the discussions are happening, at least for people that have kind of come into it in the last 5 years. And yeah, go answer questions, go add some value. And like Vinny said, you don't necessarily have to know the answer to the question to be able to, be part of the discussion. Maybe add hey, maybe this would help, or maybe there's something here. I found that to work a lot for me, just trying to be helpful, even if I don't know an answer. If nobody's given the great answer, just try to point to some resources or bring other people into the conversation. It's a great way to kind of organically network,
right.
and get people to pay attention, or see you around more often. We were just last week at this Association for High Tech Distribution, and I was talking to another startup founder yesterday who was going to his first event with their new company. It's a TechCrunch conference. And I was like, yeah, at least in my experience, people want to see you around 3 to 4 times before they start paying attention to your pitch. So don't just try to go. I mean, everybody has, if you have to sell something, it's hard because you kind of have to go try to sell yourself. But if at all, if you can just participate before you have anything to sell, that can be a huge win just to get people to be familiar with you. And I see in our industry anyway, it seems to be a big thing to have some references or be known in the industry or the community or something, versus just like, especially people coming in from outside the industry that have all the answers, but they I see generally that they don't get the reception that they're looking for when they come in like that.
Yeah, it's it's interesting you mentioned the number of touches you need to get someone to be comfortable with you. I'm actually reading a book right now about prospecting that's mentions that specific thing, and they do say plan 10 to 20 different touches for someone that's completely cold to you, that you have no previous relationship with, and that can be as simple as they see you make a social media post. I mean, that counts, but
Yeah.
it's more that awareness of it. And where we see a lot of that drop down to very low numbers or almost instant sales is really the networking side of it. I mean, ag is small like any other industry, and so it seems like most of our customers, not more than 1 or 2 connections removed from them. We always know someone that's the same person. It's kind of a automatic referral that way if you weren't directly referred in the first place. And then, like you said, a newcomer just coming in, it can be tough without the background. Now, granted, I mean, at least I grew up in it, so I kind of have that crutch to fall back on. That doesn't mean you have to grow up in an industry to be good at it. I didn't grow up with PLCs. It's debatable if I'm good at them, but they having that experience really, especially in ours industry, is useful because everyone that we're working with is new to PLCs. So versus going into established manufacturing, where they say you have to use this brand PLC. Here's our programming style guide. you're more, in a way, you're almost a subcontractor to that company themselves, doing the work exactly the way they want it. And they know exactly what they want, which can have its advantages as well. It's a lot easier to plan for, budget, where the stuff we're doing, they may not even have heard of a PLC. So we're using hardware that makes our development times fast. And then most of the time is spent on understanding their process and pointing out areas where things can be done. Had a recent conversation with someone who wanted to delay the startup of a motor so that things could warm up. And I said, well, yeah, if we tie that in, we can automate that delay. He said, yeah, but if it's already been running, it doesn't need the delay. Thinking in timers and relays, that is a challenge to add. But I'm like, this environment, we can add this. So you can't push everything on everyone at once. It's really get in, get something working for them, let the wheels start turning, then come back and update a lot of the software.
Yeah, and I think a lot of people, they need some small wins to get comfortable. And I think too, if you go too big on the scope to begin with, there's more potential issues, especially if the customer is inexperienced. Then they may not know what to ask, or there can be gaps in communication, and there's a lot more potential for failure on a big project. And then a lot of people get turned off from automation altogether if they
will. You really only have one shot.
Yeah.
What was that, Ellie?
If they get burned at all, they're just like, I'm good.
Exactly. Yeah. You really only have one shot, especially, ag. It's usually the guy signing the check or girl signing the check is the one that is operating this stuff. So if it doesn't work, half the time they won't even tell you. They just won't call you again. And they'll, naturally, if someone else asks them about it, they're going to tell them their experience with it. So it's kind of staying in contact with them because mistakes get made, things get misinterpreted. It's like, how can we improve this to make it work? Fortunately, we haven't really had too many issues with that. We try to stay pretty close contact with all the customers, and we usually have remote access to always keep anything working, but really just get them comfortable with a little. Lately, I guess a good example of finding a way in the door has been level monitoring for us. For whatever reason, nobody likes to climb a grain bin to know what's in it, for starters. Right. And manure is very hard to measure because it's traditional sensors don't work. Radar is really the only thing that works. So when you can come in and kind of solve a problem that's really been annoying them, that's a great way to open the door, and a simple way for them to be comfortable because it is reliable. And then from there, you can kind of progress. But you do still need a place to test all your new ideas. And so finding that customer that is the tinkerer and does understand it and is willing to test, your new ideas and knows how to get it running at midnight when you're not there, that's a useful avenue to find as well.
Yeah. Do you have many of those?
Most of them are relatives, and they get the unknown family discount they get to try my new ideas.
Okay. That's a good one. Yeah, you mentioned kind of before that, the small world aspect, and yeah, we were just at a party. I threw a networking party yesterday, and I bought a book. I don't have it with me, but I saw it from a post from a connection on LinkedIn who had a picture with them and the guy that wrote the book. And then I looked at that guy's profile and I was like, oh, he wrote this book. That looks interesting. And I ordered it. And then right after chapter 1, it had a challenge to, just do it, like book your own party and get it started. And I did. And I invited my dad. It says like, you should mix up different groups of people, right? So the point is to kind of like run this structured 2-hour networking party with different groups of people that and friends, family, neighbors, and then like professional connections. My dad is both a professional connection and my neighbor and my family, I guess. But he's, we're from Iceland. He does not network much. He doesn't get out much. And he happened to make a connection at this party yesterday. So he's from Iceland. We're from Iceland. And my dad has one business that runs temperature monitoring for grocery stores, coolers, fridges, freezers, pharmacies, and a few other types of things. And this woman that showed up to the party yesterday has taken over running her father's business. And they do, what was it, Ali? The air curtains.
They're like air curtains for refrigeration systems, like big walk-in.
Like walk-ins in the grocery stores where you walk into like the Costco like refrigerated room. And she has a big presence in Iceland, of all places. like because most of our grocery stores there use those instead of having like the 2 aisles of like frozen
Yeah.
foods freezers. And like what are the odds of that? But that was their first time meeting. They didn't need the 12 touches because they had such a freaking niche thing that they connected on. So that was really easy to make that connection. And when you run into somebody that has a solution to a very niche problem that you and only a few people care about, that's one of those, I think, examples that you can skip the 12 touches because just that involvement in that tiny little niche is enough to create some trust or enough interest to do some business together. So that
Yeah,
actually
exactly.
connects to a point we made earlier. But my next question that I thought of while you were talking was like, what are some of your most favorite or coolest applications that you've gotten to work on the farm or elsewhere?
Well, as I said, my first paid project was an ice machine, and I still have a soft spot for those. They're, these days it's a relatively simple thing. We've done them quite a few times, but there's still nothing more satisfying than starting that thing up and then seeing ice drop out of it. And for some context, I guess, because for audio, these are not, some of my friends ask me too, you're working on hotel ice machines and stuff? No, these, commercial ice plants for produce primarily. So they usually do about 100 to 300,000 pounds of ice a day, and 150 to 300 horsepower to run these, just the ammonia side of them. And so there's a lot going on them to make them work. The ammonia refrigeration system, the ice builder itself, and the storage, and all the in-feed sides of everything, and they need to run lights out. So, but those are seeing the ice drop, because it is a cyclic process. They're tube ice.
Yeah.
Every 10 minutes they drop ice, and it's pretty satisfying to watch. But the some of the more unique ones, we've been doing some stuff with ag robotics. We don't do the robots, but the integrating of all the systems around it. That's fun to be a part of, because that is the way ag is moving.
So what are some of the coolest like innovations in that space that you've seen actually work out in the field? Like what types of robots have you been integrating?
Well, I mean, milking robots are not a new thing by any means. They've been around for 30 years. But those have really, the last few years have really, or last decade especially, have really gotten to a point where there's no longer a debate of can they do it and how good can they do it. It's just, the finances of how do we make this facility work type of thing. But because it's pretty much shown they can do more consistent job than even some of the best farmers. Even if you're the best farmer and you're the best at milking your cow, that's great. But if you're spending hours milking cows, that's time you could be doing something else. And so the robots get you that amount of data back. It's over 100 data points they're grabbing while the cow's milking, and really that falls back to the same issue that you guys see in all of your industries, and we all see it. We're all in charge of getting everyone all this data, and then they never do anything with it. So,
Yeah.
and the robot milking side, the people that really are successful with it are the ones that have adapted kind of the mindset of, okay, we're not going to have to manage humans anymore, the payroll, all of those things, calling in sick, but we are going to have to manage maintenance and taking care of these,
Yeah.
and also kind of adapt more of a high technology mindset and use this data for good. So that's been, while it's definitely not a revolutionary topic anymore, that's been one of the more commercial successes, I think, in ag.
Well, there's usually such a big lag between like big new shiny application and some, forefront technology leader customer coming out with a success story, and then kind of the rest of industry actually adopting it uh in the
Yeah,
majority. Like that, I think takes more years than like
Delay.
you would think as an outsider. I see so many cool
yeah.
engineering videos online, and I'm like, and then at some point a news story comes out like, oh, we're doing this, and I'm like, didn't I see that on the internet like 15 years ago or 10 years ago? And it was like, yeah, it was new and novel, but it never went into production until like now. We were just talking about single pair Ethernet with
Oh,
Harding,
yeah.
and like that's been around for at least a good like 5 years. but we're now finally at a point where we're seeing like more adoption and it becoming, I guess, more of a standardized thing. And we're hoping to see, or likely to see, even more adoption acceleration over the next few years. But
yeah, and that has actually been driven a little in part by some of the ag innovation. I mean, I think the automotive industry has really driven a lot of that as well because of, cars cannot put the data they need to. They're running multiple CAN buses now because it's so limited. You need single pair Ethernet. And of course, the distance limit isn't an issue on a car, but the ag world is that way too. So we've had fully autonomous tractors for well over a decade. And of course, there's, the prototypes look great. They do everything well. And there's a lot of refinement behind that. But then there's the regulatory side of it of how are we going to move these? Who's going to be in charge of it? So to this day, most new tractors you buy will do an entire field all by themselves. You're just sitting there to make sure it doesn't screw up.
Yeah.
And there's certain things that we haven't crossed the threshold on of how do you monitor the piece of equipment behind you that it's doing the right job. And some of that issue is the same thing you see in any sort of automation is we try to automate the way we were doing it without rethinking that maybe that process isn't the best, most conducive to automation to begin with. One interesting one in ag is actually apples. So,
okay.
A traditional apple tree grows and it's a 3-dimensional problem to pick that tree and you need a ladder and everything. So lately they've all been there's a trend to grow dwarf trees, which grow on a trestle just like grapevines. And now, should you bring in robots later on, it's a 2-dimensional problem instead of a slightly 3D, but it's much easier to solve than a big blooming tree.
Yeah, absolutely. You can have rows and then just, picking on both sides or whatever versus having to get up in there into each individual. Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. Sometimes like reconfiguring our process to be more friendly to automation. Although I think the humanoid robot industry is really, thinking they're going to come in and just like plant those robots everywhere where our world is not made for automation. Are there any thoughts on those sorts of things in the ag industry? Is anybody there thinking about that or laughing at it, or like, what are your thoughts?
I haven't seen much at all because and it is the big thing is centered around these days. I just looked at the numbers. I forget what they were. The man hours that are spent on products, lettuce, broccoli, and strawberries are three, astronomically high for total man hours spent every year. And there are some robotic broccoli harvesters. It's a tricky product to harvest. One of the big issues you have in automating like something like a fresh produce of broccoli, sweet corn, lettuce is when they pick it in the field, they wrap that head or they put it in the box, and that's the same exact box that goes to the grocery store. Nobody ever touches it again. So there's been some attempts of, well, why don't we go through a mass harvest it and then automate the sortation? But now you just brought all that extra product back for no reason. And now you need this big sorting line, and that costs money and takes up space, and it still screws up, and you still got to get it in the box and get it to the store. So it's really now not every worker is going to grade that product identical, which is a major flaw of the system. But to have a humanoid walk a field and cut a broccoli plant with a broccoli knife, I don't think that's going to be the answer, especially with the distance they got to walk.
Yeah.
Maybe. I don't know.
Yeah.
I'm thinking
they could. I'm sure someone will try. And it could, maybe not a fully humanoid robot, but one of the trends we have seen with ag stuff, and there's people on both sides of it, is as years have gone on, ag equipment's gotten larger and larger because you need to maximize how much one person can do.
Yeah.
And we're up to 700 and some horsepower tractors now. And they're kind of keep saying, well, we can't really go much bigger than this because it can't fit in one piece on a semi-trailer to get to the farm anymore. And so that's been a limitation in road sizes and things like that, which we're a little more open than countries like Europe, but it's starting to become an issue. So the trend has been towards let's get make these autonomous. Well, one big autonomous machine has a lot of downsides. So it's been finding that right size of, instead of planting 48 rows of corn with a robot, why don't we have 12 robots plant 6 rows? If I did my math right. don't think I did. Did I? Maybe. And
That's
they
Yeah.
so that could be the humanoid side, or what, or a chunk of the humanoid. You know, that arm, the manipulation to
Yeah.
grab the product, that may transition over. Currently, like some of the Apple ones and stuff have a little suction cup on these, you know, arms that are doing some different things. They're not like a fully 6-axis type arm. They're still kind of on a Cartesian plane, but
Yeah.
that's been one way they've tried to solve that. But yeah, you really do need kind of the or the dexterity, I mean, of to get in and actually get that plant. And it's a challenge way above my head. It is interesting to watch how they kind of do that. Actually, on that note, there is one I know that travels along the berries, I think, and is kind of an arm that comes in and picks them. So
I
they
think
got
if you
half of a
do have that
humanoid.
kind of linear, like if you have any kind of trellis or whatever, like I think there's some more, more stuff that can be done there. I wonder about teleoperation. Is there anything like that happening? Because I know sometimes conditions in the field, like weather, it can be really hot. In some cases, there may be like pesticides in the field that are not great for people that are coming in. Is there any merit to that? Like somebody being able to you get that human judgment, I guess, but they don't have to
Mhm.
be out there. Maybe that's also
Yeah,
not
they have.
effective.
There's varying levels of that now. Almost all the equipment you can buy new now has telematics.
Yeah.
Sometimes whether you want it or not, sometimes the manufacturer forces it on you. And they so what that's kind of allowed is especially like with something like a combine where you are harvesting grains and there's a lot of settings to adjust, and you just only you need somebody to sit in the seat, but someone that's skilled enough to really make those judgments as a high value operator you want elsewhere sometimes.
Yeah.
And so what they've done is multiple ways of, say you're a farmer in a big vast area like Canada or Australia, you can daisy chain your settings of your combine to the 3, 4, 5 other ones in the field
Okay.
with you. Other ones are more just you're sitting at your office and managing the machines as they're spread out. And through the vision systems they have installed on some of these now, you can make those adjustments remotely to some extent. You know, there's sometimes you still got to walk behind the combine and see what's coming out the back, but
Yeah.
um, there's attempts to move that forward. And of course, teleoperation does exist. I don't know if it's really commercially available yet for ag. I know they do it. I think I saw Cat does it for the wheel loaders that are at the ports scooping out container ships, or not container ships, obviously, but bulk cargo ships. They only run so often. There's a guy who sits in a booth in Missouri, and he can run one in the West Coast and then run one on the East Coast, whoever needs them next.
It's pretty cool.
I was going to ask if you've ever heard of Flexiv. Not that they're doing anything specifically in ag, but like that's them. Flexiv Robotics is trying to replicate the human wrist. And so they have all these extra sensors that I would think could, help with ag. But at the same time, I've had a conversation with people that come from farms. And so I asked, I was like, we can do everything now, like with automation. And he was like, yeah, but for how much? Because like some of these labor forces are coming from not this country, come over the border,
Mm-hmm.
and produce all this, and do all of this stuff that they've been doing for generations. And then then saying his argument was that we'll never have even how much is this robot? How much is this? Because the farmers are never going to go for that robot, because they still have this workforce available, and it's going to be less. The workforce is less,
Right.
unless you can figure out what that ROI looks like. And it's harder to convince, I think, at least the farmers that are using that labor.
Right. Yeah, and that is, if you get into produce, especially because those the migrant labor force is it's a seasonal program, so industries like dairy and stuff kind of struggle because they're 365.
Yeah.
But
Okay.
then, but yeah, with fresh produce, it's seasonal, so migrant is pretty prevalent there, and a lot of them, same exact people, come back every single year. But that's not a cheap labor force at all. It actually is pretty expensive. You have to pay everything for their transportations and stuff to get them here. They have, I believe, the Washington minimum wage for H2A is over $20 now. which, relative to the cost of living, of course, none of I think the lowest H2A minimum wage is double the actual minimum wage. And then you have to provide all the housing, transportation. There may even be a meal requirement. There's a lot of regulations on the housing. So it's certainly a tool in their toolbox, and it's a necessary. It's one that they've kind of the industry has settled on as how to bridge this gap, from what we were 50 years ago, when it was a bunch of people picking their own products, to trying to grow and keep the food. I mean, really, we have the cheapest food in the world, and it's kind of driven by that. But the labor pool and the cost of labor is growing, which does bring in opportunities for automation. And I think the picking at the field level may be the last one. The stuff that we're doing is all at the packing house side, and trying to help with the labor situation there. But that does bring up a good point of the cost. Where we got a lot of traction in that industry is understanding it's seasonal. This stuff has 4 months that it runs out of the year, so you can't put the biggest name, latest and greatest PLC in there. It needs to hit a price point. If you show up with that certain, one of those certain big brands, they're not even going to look. So it's understanding that they really have that target, that ROI has to be in a short amount of time. They're working on kind of a limited budget, but still being able to have enough at the end of the day that you can be successful as well.
Yeah. I worked for a while with Festo out in Northern California, and like Salinas was my territory, so a lot of lettuce packing going on there.
Yeah,
but I didn't know this until I kind of got down there, that the seasons, they have Yuma, Arizona, and then the Salinas, California area, and their seasons are slightly different. And so they will pack up the whole lines and like take them down to Arizona during time, and then pack them back up. And because I guess there's just like those two places and kind of the two different seasons.
Primarily, and Mexico fills in when those two are out of season for lettuce.
Oh, okay. Yeah. I guess some of them are probably transporting that machinery then down there during that time.
Some do. Some have separate operations down there, but then what they're able to stagger their season a little, to where they'll move the cooling equipment. And now these are not easy to move. I mean, a vacuum cooler, it takes a few semis to move, and it's a 500 horsepower ammonia refrigeration skid. It's a big chore. But the traveling cooling systems were very big the past 30 or plus years, to try and spread that cost, to the point a number of the packagers and growers actually started their own cooling companies to cool for others. And as the industry is consolidated, as industries do, more people have just kind of been able to afford to leave their systems a little more permanent. But it is still common to move them around to try and offset that cost of a vacuum tube. Like I said, it's a couple $1 million, and it doesn't make you any money when it's just sitting for 8 months out of the year.
Yeah. Have you seen any other kind of applications that maybe farmers are like co-oping? Or I guess I'm thinking of like in Napa Valley, for instance, a lot of smaller winemakers, they don't bottle. They don't have bottling lines.
Right.
So there are like mobile bottling trucks that will come during bottling season or whatever that time is. And they'll just, pull up to one of these wineries and bottle all their barrels and then move on to the next one. Is there any technology like that other than like the lettuce or the stuff that we just talked about moving? Because I know like in the ag industry, there are a lot of co-ops for certain things, right? Like dairy farms,
Right.
A lot of them co-op, like they sell all their milk together as a group to grocers or something like that. Can you talk a little bit about that? I'm just always interested in like the applications of sharing in community in different industries.
Yeah. There's one that we've been involved in recently it's not anything super glamorous, but it is an example of it. Is there's a push for feed. The feeds that get fed to animals are constantly evolving, and there's a mix of byproducts and different ways to feed them. And one that's been discovered is that dry fine ground corn seems to be one of the better ingredients for high producing dairy cows. So there's been a huge push up here. Everybody wants fine ground corn. It's also logistically easier because you can buy and sell dry corn. It's a lot harder to buy and sell wet corn because that only happens in the fall when you harvest it. So the cost to put in, you put in this milling system to generate this, but there again, it sits for a lot of the year. So we've been automating a lot of those mills to run fully autonomously, pretty much lights out. And then what some of these people are doing is putting in extra bins where they'll make product for other local farmers and sell to them. And then our system just detects once they pick up their load, it'll refill it and kind of go from there. So that's kind of a small scale way of just, it's usually 1 to 5 at the most, kind of together. I don't know that any of them are necessarily pooling resources to build one. Some might, but
Right.
a lot of them, it's, I'm going to be the one, I'm going to build it, I'm going to charge you this amount of money type of thing. And then, as you mentioned, the cooperative thing has been part of ag forever. So a lot of the inputs that farmers buy, the seeds, the fertilizers, and things all come through cooperatives. And then dairy, a lot of them are in co-ops. The dairy I grew up on, their milk goes to a private processor, but there's still a co-op kind of that they're part of. And that comes back to actually almost the opposite of what you were talking about. We're starting to see some of in dairy around here the past decade or so is people starting to do some of their own processing. If you're near a large metro area, there's a big demand for locally produced stuff where people can come out and look at your cows.
Yeah.
And so that has helped some people. That's a much higher profit margin than you would get selling it as a commodity. Naturally, you have a lot of overhead in doing that, but that is something people have done. And the same thing that you mentioned with the wine growers. If someone is new and making their own cheese, they'll sometimes go to a smaller cheese maker and just have them private label something for them because the licensing and regulations, it is a lot of work and a lot of risk to invest all that up front.
So I'm going to connect that point back to come to OT SCADACon so that you can find other automation professionals that you can collaborate with if there are things that either you are not big enough to handle or areas that are adjacent to things you know. What are you going to be talking about at OT SCADACon, Vinny, and why should people... What are they going to hear about that maybe they can reach out to you or consider you a resource on in their business going forward?
Right. I'm listed as talking about ag automation, so probably a few of the things we've talked about here today. And of course, have some natural other things of how to navigate the world of trying to do your own automation thing.
Yeah.
And a lot of that has been around how to kind of create your own little market that doesn't exist. And of course, people can always ask me technical questions, but I'm no expert there. I just have my opinions.
So it looks like we're about getting close to an hour here. So Ali, what other questions do you have?
Sure. So when I have a chemical engineering background, and my first process engineering job was growing algae, and so we got like crazy into like greenhouse automation, and so there's just so much that we used to look at there, and then we would try to grow it with lights, and like so I know about like vertical farming, and like I guess have you gotten into any of that stuff, like, or have you do any of your current customers experiment with some of that stuff, and does that stuff interest you, and like how has it changed, I guess, because it's been like 10 years for me since I touched greenhouse automations.
Yeah, and it does in a way. A lot of that was all, the big push of the vertical stuff was a lot of venture backed, and there's people then that were also getting back to create a system for those. And like we all know, if you can build enough of something, it's substantially cheaper to build a microcontroller of your own design versus using a PLC. So it's to hit that price point for ag. But the vertical thing is a bit of a topic in the ag world. It's a contested topic because there's people that see it as the way of the future, and there's people that see it as actually incredibly inefficient and unsustainable. So somewhere in the middle is probably where that is. I don't deal with any true vertical farms. I deal with people that grow in high tops and things like that of greenhouses, but nothing that is a true thing you see of a farm downtown New York City with nothing other than water, and somehow they get all of their inputs in there and it's better for the environment.
Yeah, I think oftentimes there's a lot of like hidden costs and things like that. They're like, oh, we're going to save a lot on this. And then you're like, oh, but unintended consequences. Now we have a bunch of other
It is.
costs or negatives or whatever, right?
And even, in my area, land is $20,000 an acre for decent land. And that's incredibly expensive, but compared to a vertical farm, it's still some of the cheapest area you can grow a crop.
Well, I will give a plug for well, I don't really have the name, but I might share something more about it next time I visit Iceland. But I have someone in my extended family that I actually haven't met in person, but he's the co-founder of a company where they're building farming autonomous farms inside of containers
Okay.
in Iceland, our climate, it's very barren and it's very cold in the wintertime. We don't grow a whole lot of things other than like greenhouse. We do well with cucumbers and tomatoes and
Mhm.
lettuce and a few other things. But the idea here is that you can have a kind of self-sustaining little autonomous thing that makes food in like remote local villages and stuff like that don't have access to fresh produce, especially not in the wintertime. We have to like import a lot of stuff. And so then it's not necessarily about cost effectiveness, but about access.
Yeah.
So I think that could be like a reasonable application of something like a vertical farming or container farming is where you don't have access to or land that has conditions to grow things.
Yeah, that is a great application for it.
And then one that I heard about recently, and I don't really know enough about it to say anything, was somebody that is trying to grow produce in containers at sea.
Okay.
So that's new. And I don't have much to say about it other
That's
than that's
amazing.
interesting.
They need the produce, those like squid farmers that are out there for like 2 years.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah,
I don't know, though, that they're thinking about putting it on boats where people are, but rather the farm itself just being out at sea.
out on the water.
In the water for, I'm not sure. I don't remember specifically
like
what the reason was.
But
now
they need to grow food.
That's a pretty good idea.
Because they don't let them off to like go get more vegetables, so they die of B12 poisoning or B12 deficiency.
Yeah.
Well, back in the day, it was scurvy. So I just asked.
It was.
Yesterday was eating a lime. So like she squeezes the lime, she licks the lime, she drinks the juice.
I'm Mexican.
And then she just like flipped it open and just like ate the rest of it. And we were just at a conference. We're trying to prevent getting sick because we got like conference season. And vitamin C is a huge thing. And I didn't know until at some point in my adult life that scurvy is vitamin C deficiency. And it was because all these people were just on a boat for months and didn't eat anything fresh. So yeah, one last tangent, I guess, for the fun of the conversation. So with that, Vinny, is there anything that you want to ask or talk about that we didn't cover or that came to your mind before we do the standard last question and then sign offs?
I think we covered some pretty interesting topics today.
Cool. Then my last question is, can you tell us where people can find you, reach out to you if they have any questions, ag projects, want to work with forums. You, where you are, your username on the forums or on Reddit? No, just kidding. Yeah, give us all the things that you want to tell people to pay attention to. And then if you have anything cool coming up that we should be looking out for, and we'll make sure to share on Automation Ladies.
The easiest place is really LinkedIn these days, probably just my name. And I do try to keep the company website updated with some of our recent projects. Most of the projects we do are at farms, so we usually don't have any restrictions on sharing a lot of what we do, which is a pretty nice spot to be in.
Yeah, that's huge.
So, yeah.
I know a lot of people in other industries are envious of that because they're like, I do a lot of cool stuff, but it's under NDA.
Yeah, it's not a big thing we run into. We do have some, but it's not a lot. So that's the best place to try to keep those areas updated as much as possible.
What kind of industries do care about that, or what type of farmers do care about hiding some of that? Like,
not a lot.
Where's the highest tech stuff going on in ag?
There's nothing that fancy going on. There is nobody's called me to be a part of it, at least.
Okay.
So no, there is, naturally, if you do some work for some multinational OEMs, which do some support with some of them, it's just kind of their standard practice. So that's the only time we really run into it. At the farm side, if anyone it seems like in a lot of ag, situations that I've had. If someone comes up to you with an NDA, they probably don't have a great idea that's going to make any money, but that's definitely not the truth. But, that's just, there's certainly places for it, but, with doing the true, more industrial integration stuff, just not something we ever get involved with, because ours is right at the customer's side and kind of customized for them. We're not developing some fancy autonomous robot type stuff.
Yeah. All right. Well, thank you so much for coming on the show. People can connect with Vinny because you probably found out about this episode on LinkedIn, or if you're listening in your car through and you got it, from iTunes or whatever, you can head over to automationladies.io. If you want to connect with Vinny, we'll have a link to his LinkedIn profile, and we'll try to feel free to keep in touch and update if you have any future projects or links that you want to publicize. We can put them on your profile to keep that up to date. And yeah, this was a lot of fun. Thank you so much for chatting with us. And we look forward to seeing you in July. And then anytime you have like a super cool application that you are allowed to share, feel free to hit us up so that we can share that with our audience. Especially like videos of anything getting made that we all eat. I think like all of us nerds would love to see that.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.
All right. Thank you. Have a great rest of your day. Bye.